Janet Anderson was already someone else's wife when she first realized she wanted another man. Not because she was reckless, not because she was bored with money or craving chaos. It happened quietly, the way hunger creeps in when a body has been denied what it needs for too long. It happened while she was standing between two men, one she was married to and one she had not yet touched, her body responding before her conscience could catch up. Hi family, I need you to please help subscribe and watch my video to the end. Please remember to subscribe to my channel. Let us continue. Her husband stood closest to her, solid and familiar, a man whose wealth shaped the air around him. He was disciplined, controlled, respected. Everything about him spoke of ownership, of spaces, of outcomes, of people. Janet belonged to him in every way that could be documented. Marriage certificates, shared properties, public appearances. Yet even standing beside him, Janet felt alone inside her own skin. Dave's hand stood a short distance away. He did not crowd her. He did not assert himself. He simply existed in her awareness, calm, grounded, observant. There was nothing flashy about him, nothing loud, but Janet felt his presence with a sharp clarity that unsettled her. The way he noticed without starring, the way his attention rested on her without demand, the way her body reacted to him before she had any reason to justify it. She was married. She reminded herself of that constantly. Janet Anderson was known as a billionaire's wife, but she was also a woman whose body had learned restraint too well. Her days were structured, controlled, carefully paced. She lived inside routines that left little room for desire. Over time, her marriage had become efficient, two lives running parallel, intersecting only when necessary. Touch had grown rare. Intimacy had thinned into something polite and forgettable. Her husband provided stability, not closeness. His presence filled rooms but never reached her. He slept beside her without knowing her. He touched her without curiosity. Janet had learned to accept that kind of absence, telling herself it was normal, telling herself love evolved into distance. But bodies do not lie. Standing there, aware of Dave's hands in a way that felt uncomfortably physical, Janet felt something stir, something she had not allowed herself to feel in years. It wasn't lust yet. It was awareness, heat, a quiet recognition that she was still capable of wanting and being wanted. Dave did not move toward her, yet she felt the space between them shrink. Her husband did not notice. He rarely did. Janet's marriage had taught her how to disappear while remaining visible. She smiled when expected. She stood where she was supposed to stand. She fulfilled the role assigned to her with practiced ease. But inside, there was a growing restlessness, a tension that had nowhere to go. Dave's hands represented nothing concrete yet. No promise, no betrayal, just the unsettling truth that Janet's body had not gone numb after all. Later that evening, the awareness followed her home. It settled beneath her skin, quiet but persistent. She lay beside her husband, feeling the familiar distance between them, noticing how little his presence affected her. Her thoughts drifted, not to fantasy, not to scenes, but to sensation, to what it might feel like to be touched slowly, intentionally, to be studied, to be felt. She did not act on it. Not yet. But something had shifted. Janet began to notice things she had trained herself to ignore. The way her husband's touch felt routine rather than intimate. The way he reached for her without hunger. The way her body remained awake even after he turned away. Desire had not disappeared. It had simply been uninvited. Dave's presence lingered in her mind without effort. The memory of his attention resurfaced at odd moments, not intrusive, just there. It unsettled her how little she had to force herself to remember him. This was not love, not yet, not even infidelity. It was recognition. Janet Anderson was still a woman with a body that responded, a heart that noticed, a mind that remembered what intimacy once felt like. And now, standing between the life she lived and the desire she had buried, she felt the first pull toward something she knew she was not supposed to want. Her husband slept peacefully beside her, unaware of the quiet fracture forming inside the marriage. Dave's hands existed elsewhere, equally unaware of how deeply he had already entered her awareness. And Janet lay between them, married, restless, and standing at the edge of something that would soon demand a choice. Janet lay between two worlds, and by morning, one of them began to move closer. The awareness she had carried into sleep did not fade with daylight. It followed her through the routine of her day, through the controlled rhythm of a life she knew too well. Her husband moved around her with the same distant familiarity, unaware of the quiet shift that had already taken place. Nothing about him changed. And that, more than anything, confirmed what Janet had begun to understand the night before. What had changed was her. Dave's hands entered her awareness again, not as a thought she summoned, but as a presence that arrived naturally, effortlessly, as though her mind had been waiting for him. When she saw him, the recognition was immediate and physical. Her body responded before she allowed herself to think. A subtle warmth settled low in her stomach. Her breath adjusted just slightly. It unsettled her how instinctive it was. Dave was not a man who rushed into spaces. He moved with ease, unforced, grounded in himself. He noticed Janet without making a performance of it, and that quiet attention felt more intimate than anything she had experienced in years. He saw her as a woman before he saw her as a title, and her body responded to that distinction with embarrassing honesty. Janet was careful. She remained composed, but something about the way Dave stood near her, close enough to feel, far enough not to claim, made restraint feel like a conscious effort rather than a habit. She became aware of the space between them, of how easily it could disappear. Dave noticed the shift too. Noticed how Janet's eyes lingered longer than politeness required, how her movements slowed when she was near him, how her presence felt charged in a way that had nothing to do with conversation. He did not reach for her. He did not crowd her. He let the tension exist, letting it build naturally, letting it breathe. The intimacy began there, not with touch but with awareness. As the day unfolded, moments accumulated, standing too close, passing glances that held just long enough to feel intentional. Janet became acutely aware of her body, of the way her clothes rested against her skin, of the way her breath changed when Dave was near. She felt awake in a way she had forgotten was possible. Her husband remained oblivious. Janet felt the contrast sharply. Where her husband's presence dulled her senses, Dave's sharpened them. Where her husband's touch felt routine, Dave's proximity felt electric. The realization did not make her reckless, but it did make her honest with herself. She wanted this feeling. Later, when the opportunity presented itself, unplanned, unannounced, Janet found herself alone with Dave. The space was quiet, unobserved, suspended in a stillness that made every movement feel louder. She felt the weight of the moment before anything happened, felt the tension settle thick between them. Dave moved closer. Not abruptly, not aggressively, just enough. Janet felt the warmth of his body, the nearness of his presence. She became aware of how long it had been since someone had stood close enough to make her skin react. Her breath caught before she could control it. Dave noticed. When his hand brushed against hers, it was accidental only in theory. The contact was brief, but it sent a slow, deliberate heat through her. Janet did not pull away. She let the contact linger, her fingers responding instinctively, curling just slightly. The intimacy deepened in layers. A hand resting at her waist, steady and deliberate. A pause that stretched long enough to feel intentional. Janet felt herself leaning in, her body responding before her mind could intervene. She felt seen, felt wanted, not demanded, not expected, but chosen. The touch was unhurried. Dave's hand traced her presence rather than claiming it, lingering at her lower back, guiding her closer without force. Janet felt her body soften in response, felt her awareness narrow until there was nothing but the space between them. She was conscious of every sensation, the warmth of his skin, the steadiness of his breath, the way her own body reacted without shame. This was intimacy. Not rushed, not hidden behind obligation, just two bodies acknowledging what had already been felt. Janet allowed herself to feel it fully. She did not think about her husband in that moment. She did not think about consequences. She focused on sensation, the slow build of desire, the quiet thrill of being touched with intention. Dave's touch spoke where words were unnecessary, and Janet's body answered without hesitation. When the moment finally broke, it did so gently. No abrupt withdrawal, no awkwardness, just a shared understanding that something had begun. Janet stepped back first. Not because she wanted to, but because she knew she had crossed a line she could not uncross. Her body still hummed with awareness, with a desire that refused to settle. Dave did not stop her. He watched her with a calm understanding that told her he felt it too. Nothing needed to be said. The unresolved tension from the night before had found form. Janet now understood what her body had been responding to. Dave was not a passing thought. He was a presence that stirred something she had denied for too long. When Janet returned to her husband later, the contrast was undeniable. His touch felt distant. His presence felt heavy. Her body, now awake, refused to forget what intention felt like. She lay beside her husband that night, aware of how little he knew her, how much he had missed. Her body carried the memory of Dave's touch, subtle but persistent, settling into her like a promise. Janet had not yet given herself fully, but she had already begun. Janet could not stop thinking about him. The memory of Dave's hands, the weight of his presence, the subtle heat of his touch, the way his hand had lingered just long enough, followed her through every quiet moment. She moved through her day like a woman half awake, her body remembering sensations her mind tried to ignore. It was not just attraction anymore. It was recognition. She craved him the way she had never craved her husband, the way she had almost forgotten she could crave anyone. Her husband went about his usual routines, oblivious to the stirring inside her. He was meticulous, controlling, precise, the very image of success. He never noticed the way Janet's eyes drifted to her reflection, the way her fingers lingered at the edge of her sleeve as though searching for something missing. He never saw the subtle tightening of her chest or the tremor in her wrist when a thought of Dave entered her mind. Janet wanted more than what she had been allowed. She wanted someone who noticed her, truly noticed her. She wanted a gaze that traced the curves of her body, that lingered on the hollows of her neck and the lines of her waist. She wanted hands that were patient and certain, that could explore without hesitation. She wanted warmth that stayed, attention that followed her even when the room was quiet. Dave had shown her the first taste of that, not abruptly, not violently, just enough to make her body remember itself. She had returned home that night restless, almost vibrating from the sensation of his nearness, and she had lain beside her husband feeling the dullness of routine touch, aware of the spark that still hummed between her shoulder blades and down her spine. Over the next days, Janet found herself seeking the awareness, the anticipation, the quiet, unspoken intimacy that had emerged with Dave. Her body had begun to remember what desire felt like when it was noticed, when it was reciprocated. She started moving differently, just enough for Dave to notice the change, even in small ways. The tilt of her shoulder, the sway of her hips, the way she lingered slightly when passing close to him. He noticed, as he always did. Their encounters became longer, not in duration but in tension. A brush of his hand on hers would linger as she walked past him. A glance would stretch, holding her attention and stirring her pulse. Every meeting built an electric anticipation, a slow, deliberate pull that left Janet aching in ways she had not felt in years. It was subtle at first, almost polite, but it grew with every passing moment, like fire smoldering under dry leaves, waiting for a spark. Janet began to test the limits quietly. She would lean just slightly closer, allow a hand to brush against hers, feel the slow warmth of his arm near hers without pulling away. She noticed how his eyes darkened, how his posture shifted, how a hand that rested casually on a desk could suddenly feel deliberate. She was learning, discovering, becoming conscious of how much she had been deprived. Her body responded instantly, a shiver down her spine, fingers tingling at the memory of contact, her breath catching in small, impatient ways. She craved the nearness of him, the slow build of touch that implied more without saying it. Desire for him was no longer a thought, it was a current, pulling her toward something inevitable. Even when she was alone, Janet felt it. The memory of the warmth, the nearness, the way his presence could make her aware of herself in ways no one else had. She remembered the subtle curve of his hand, the strength in his forearm, the quiet assurance in the way he moved. Every time her husband touched her routine hand or brushed past her without thought, Janet felt the absence. And in that absence, she wanted him more. She wanted the intensity, the deliberate awareness, the intimacy she had been denied. She wanted Dave in ways she hadn't admitted to herself before, full attention, desire, and presence. She wanted him to touch her in ways that left her shivering, wanting, aware of every inch of herself. She wanted what she had never been allowed, and she wanted it now. That night Janet lay in her bedroom, alone with the memory of him, imagining what it would feel like to be near him again. Not just close, not just touched, fully acknowledged, desired, and remembered. She traced the contours of her own body with her hands, imagining his hands in those same places. She allowed herself the smallest sighs, letting her awareness of her own need grow. Janet had crossed a threshold without stepping over a line. She wanted, and that wanting demanded fulfillment. She was conscious, aware, deliberate, and every beat of her pulse, every shiver along her skin, reminded her that she could no longer settle for what she had. Desire was no longer an abstract thought. Desire was her body remembering itself, and Janet Anderson was ready to follow where it would lead. Janet's anticipation had become a quiet ache, one that pulsed beneath her skin every time she thought of him. Dave's hands had moved from being an awareness to a presence she could feel, not just with her mind, but with her body. Every brush of his sleeve against hers, every shared space between them, ignited a tension that had no escape. She longed for the next encounter, the next moment where intention could finally meet sensation. It came sooner than she expected. They found themselves alone in a space that seemed suspended from time. Not planned, not dramatic, just a quiet corner with light falling softly across the room, highlighting the edges of their bodies without exposing them. Janet felt the air tighten, the kind of charged stillness that makes every inch of skin sensitive, every nerve alive. Dave stepped closer, almost imperceptibly, and Janet felt the subtle warmth radiate from him. Their hands brushed, lightly, almost accidentally, but Janet felt it fully, like electricity running beneath her skin. She did not move away. Her fingers tingled at the ghost of contact, her chest tightening in ways that demanded attention. Then he moved again. Not with force, not with urgency. Slow, controlled, intentional. His hand traced a line along her arm, from wrist to elbow, his touch lingering just enough to make her pulse quicken. Janet inhaled sharply, realizing that this was the first time in years that anyone had elicited a reaction like this. The intimacy was raw, yet restrained. It made her aware of every curve of herself, every point of tension she had forgotten existed. She wanted more. And yet she held herself back, savoring the slow, deliberate build of sensation. Dave's fingers brushed against her waist, the movement feather-light but purposeful. Janet's body responded instinctively, her muscles coiling, her breath catching, the small, quiet shivers rolling down her spine. She did not speak. No words were needed. The intimacy existed in the space between them, in the subtle gravity of presence, in the way each touch became a conversation her body understood before her mind could process it. Janet's hand found his, almost unconsciously, and their fingers intertwined for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Heat pooled low in her stomach, spreading slowly, deliberately, until her body felt awake in every sense. The sensation was intoxicating. She felt herself leaning in slightly, seeking more of the nearness she had been starving for, yet keeping just enough restraint to savor the anticipation. Dave did not rush. He did not demand. His hand moved with a measured care, tracing the lines of her side. Lingering at her hip, the pressure just enough to make her aware of every breath, every shift of weight, every pulse that trembled under her skin. Janet's body responded, opening, stretching toward the sensation with a hunger she had kept hidden for years. Her pulse raced. Her lips parted slightly, unconsciously, as if she were breathing in more than air, breathing in the electricity of proximity, the heat of desire that was finally allowed to awaken. Janet realized she had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted this deliberately, to be observed with such focused attention without the interruption of duty or obligation. The intimacy was slow, building, deliberate. Every small motion, every subtle movement became a signal, a question, a promise. Janet's body hummed under the awareness of him, the weight of being touched without words, and the heat of sensation that demanded she acknowledge it. She felt desire, alive and dangerous, stirring in places she had almost forgotten. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. Janet felt herself leaning closer, allowing a subtle arch of her body into his hand, feeling the deliberate pressure against her. Her skin tingled. Her breath quickened. Every subtle shift of Dave's presence elicited a response she no longer attempted to hide. Every inch of her awareness was consumed by the slow intimacy, the measured, careful buildup of sensation. When he finally withdrew slightly, it was gentle, like a pause meant to tease rather than deny. Janet's body ached softly in the absence, a quiet echo of the touch that had ignited her from the inside out. She felt the pull already, the anticipation of what could come next, the hunger that had now rooted itself firmly inside her. She stepped back with a controlled composure, but inside, Janet felt fully alive, aware, awake, and trembling with the knowledge that desire had returned to her body, and that Dave's hands had become more than a fleeting thought. He had become the spark she could not ignore, the presence her body demanded, the beginning of something she was no longer willing to deny. The slow touch had changed everything, and Janet knew it. Janet could no longer ignore the pull. The slow, deliberate touch from Dave lingered in her memory, weaving through every moment of her day, demanding her attention. Her husband's presence felt heavier than ever, a constant reminder of what her body had been missing, of what it had learned to crave in silence. She had awakened to the heat of her own desire, and now she wanted more, closer, longer, deliberate attention that left her aware of every inch of herself. Dave's hands found her again in that quiet, suspended space where they could exist without interruption. The air between them was charged, taut with anticipation, the kind that made her pulse quicken before anything had even begun. Janet felt the awareness of him as she approached, and her body responded instinctively. She wanted to be close. She wanted to feel the deliberate brush of his hands, the slow, intentional pressure that made her shiver, the heat that promised attention without rush. When Dave stepped forward, Janet felt the difference immediately. His hand rested lightly on her waist, tracing a subtle path that seemed to map her body without words, without urgency. She felt herself lean into him, not out of need but out of curiosity, curiosity about what it had been like to be truly noticed. The brush of his fingers along her ribs, the faint touch against the small of her back, made her aware of muscles she hadn't acknowledged in years, of nerves that had slept too long. Janet's body responded to every inch of him. She felt heat pooling low, spreading upward with a gentle insistence. Her breath hitched in soft, barely audible bursts as Dave's hand moved slowly along her side, lingering at the curve of her hip before gliding back. Every motion was deliberate, calculated, intimate, but not explicit. It spoke of recognition, of understanding, of attention focused entirely on her. She raised her arms subtly, leaning slightly into his touch, feeling the length of his fingers along her shoulders, the warmth of his palm along her spine. Janet was learning herself again through him, learning how her body reacted to intention, to patience, to deliberate attention. The tension that had been building inside her for days found release in the measured movements, in the subtle exploration that did not demand anything beyond awareness. Dave's presence was patient, attuned. Every small movement, every lingering brush of skin became a language between them. Janet's hands, previously hesitant, now traced the line of his arm, feeling strength without force, heat without hurry. She felt herself lean into the curve of his body, noticing how his weight shifted subtly with hers, how his breathing synchronized imperceptibly with her own. Time seemed to slow. Janet's awareness narrowed until the rest of the world disappeared. Her husband, obligations, expectations, all irrelevant. Only the two of them existed, connected through awareness and touch. Her body responded instinctively to every subtle shift. A hand that rested lightly on her back, a thumb tracing slowly along her wrist, the gentle warmth of his chest when they moved closer. Every inch she revealed of herself was met with a deliberate acknowledgement, a recognition that left her trembling quietly with sensation. She felt the awakening fully, the thrill of being seen, the hunger of being wanted, the heat of anticipation coiling low in her body. Every brush of his hand, every slight shift of his weight, made her acutely aware of what she had been denied in her marriage. Every subtle stroke, every intentional pause, taught her to feel herself again, to inhabit her own body with attention and desire. Janet let herself lean further into him, guided by instinct and curiosity. The intimacy was slow, patient, and deliberate. There were no demands, no pressure, no need for words. Each small motion deepened the awareness, connecting her body to the heat of recognition, the knowledge that she could be felt, noticed, and desired fully. The moment stretched, an unspoken dialogue of touch and presence. Janet discovered curves and contours she had almost forgotten, nerves that sparked under gentle contact, the subtle rhythm of her own heartbeat aligning with the pulse of someone else's attention. It was education, revelation, and pleasure all at once, unfolding layer by layer. When at last she stepped back, it was with quiet satisfaction. Her body hummed with a low, deliberate heat, her breath still shallow with awareness. She had learned what it felt like to be acknowledged, to be traced, to be noticed in ways her husband had never managed. She had allowed herself to respond fully, to inhabit desire, and to feel the subtle power of being wanted. And yet the hunger had only grown. She knew she wanted more. More closeness, more deliberate attention, more of the intimacy that made her body remember itself. Dave's hands had opened something in her that could not be ignored, and Janet understood that this was only the beginning. Her pulse lingered long after he had moved away, a quiet reminder that what she had discovered was alive inside her. She could no longer go back to the emptiness of routine. She wanted the heat. She wanted the tension. She wanted the deliberate, patient intimacy that Dave had shown her, and she was ready to seek it again. Janet could no longer resist the rhythm of desire that had taken hold of her. The days had been long with anticipation, but the nights with Dave's hands became a lesson in subtlety, patience, and awakening. Each encounter was deliberate, measured, and full of an intimacy that was both thrilling and overwhelming. Janet's body remembered itself in ways she had almost forgotten, and every night built upon the last, layer upon layer, sensation upon sensation, until the quiet hunger she had carried for so long transformed into a full-bodied craving. The first night had been a discovery, a slow touch, a mutual awareness, but the following nights became an exploration, a ritual that neither forced nor hurried. Janet learned the language of proximity, how a brush of skin could speak volumes, how fingers tracing lightly along a waistline could ignite a slow, deliberate heat. She leaned into it, breathing shallow, letting every nerve awaken with the soft pressure, the quiet warmth, the subtle intimacy that Dave offered. He moved with a patience that both grounded and intoxicated her. Every touch lingered, every brush of his hand felt intentional. Janet's body responded before her mind could intervene, muscles coiling, pulse quickening, breath catching, shivers rippling softly down her spine. Each movement became an unspoken conversation, an acknowledgement of desire without demand, an education in sensation that left her trembling quietly yet wanting more. Back-to-back nights created a rhythm neither had planned but both surrendered to naturally. In the quiet darkness, Janet felt the deliberate warmth of his presence as he traced her shoulders, hands brushing along the curve of her back, palms resting at the small of her waist. Every subtle contact sent a wave through her body, coaxing her to awaken fully to what she had long suppressed. She leaned into him instinctively, her breath matching his, her fingers brushing along his forearm in response, every pulse of skin against skin a whisper of something more. The intimacy was measured, patient, teasing without being overt. Dave explored with careful attention, noticing the way her body responded to pressure, to heat, to proximity. Janet found herself arching slightly, leaning into each deliberate touch, letting her awareness shrink until nothing existed but the contact, the heat, the quiet, unhurried attention. Every inch of her body felt remembered, acknowledged, and awakened. Nights merged into each other. The same quiet spaces, the same patient exploration, the same delicate tension. Janet learned which subtle touches made her shiver, which brushes of skin sent heat pooling low and spreading upward, and which movements of his hands drew her attention fully into the present. She discovered herself in ways she had almost forgotten, the curve of her neck responding to gentle tracing, the line of her spine awakening under careful fingertips, the swell of her pulse matching the rhythm of awareness that grew between them. Even as she returned to her life with her husband, Janet felt the echo of those nights lingering under her skin. The memory of back-to-back intimacy hummed softly, a heat that refused to cool, a reminder that she had been awakened in ways her marriage had never allowed. Every brush of her husband's hand, every casual touch, felt dull in contrast, leaving her acutely aware of what she now craved, what her body demanded, and what Dave had begun to teach her. Each night ended not in finality, but in anticipation. Janet felt it as she left the space, her body alive, aware, and trembling with the memory of the heat that had coursed through her. Every nerve had been awakened, every inch of skin sensitized to intention, and every pulse reminded her that desire was no longer something she could ignore. Janet had crossed a threshold. She was no longer merely longing. She was learning, experiencing, inhabiting sensation fully, letting herself respond to deliberate intimacy, and craving it night after night. The repetition of their encounters had created a rhythm, a cadence of awareness and anticipation that left her breathless, alive, and quietly addicted to the subtle, patient, sensual connection that Dave had shown her. By the end of the nights, she could not deny it. Her body, her awareness, her craving had claimed him fully, even before a single word had been spoken. She was awake, alive, and learning in every subtle touch, every deliberate caress, every quiet movement that taught her what she had been missing. And in the quiet aftermath, lying alone, Janet felt the heat of her own awakening, knowing that this was only the beginning. She had learned to want deliberately, to respond fully, and to embrace desire in a way that had been denied to her for far too long. The nights had shown her a new world, a world of subtle intimacy, sensuality, and anticipation, a world she now inhabited completely. The night had come with a weight Janet had been anticipating all day. Her mind, already restless from the quiet rhythm of back-to-back encounters, refused to settle. Every thought returned to Dave's hands, the way his hands knew her body, the deliberate warmth of his touch, the slow, patient intimacy that had awakened every inch of her. Tonight, she realized she wanted more than anticipation. She wanted fullness, the deliberate acknowledgement of every inch, every curve, every pulse of her body that had been waiting for him. They found themselves alone, the world shrinking until only the space between them mattered. Janet's pulse quickened the moment she sensed him near, every nerve alight, every sense heightened. Dave's presence carried intention. There was no rush, no hurry, only awareness, an awareness that traced her body before his hands ever did. His touch began slowly, deliberately, almost teasingly. Fingers brushed along her shoulders, tracing the line of her collarbone, following the subtle curves of her back. Janet leaned into him instinctively, letting herself feel the heat of deliberate attention spread through her. Every inch of skin that responded was remembered, acknowledged, awakened. Her breath caught as his hand moved lower, lingering at the small of her back, tracing in slow circles that made her spine arch slightly. The sensation was subtle, sensual, enough to ignite a quiet ache that spread throughout her body. Janet's body responded before she could think, soft shivers running down her arms, a low pulse of warmth pooling and spreading upward, her chest rising and falling with shallow, deliberate breaths. Dave's attention was patient, learning her rhythm as if memorizing her body's secret language. His hands traced along her sides, down to her hips, pausing at every subtle curve, every point that responded with awareness. Janet's fingers brushed along his forearm in response, a silent acknowledgement of sensation, a subtle encouragement to continue. The intimacy was slow, deliberate, and fully consuming. She felt it, the way his hand lingered just long enough, the way he traced without pressure, the way his presence made her pulse quicken with anticipation. Janet leaned into him further, feeling the gentle warmth of his body against hers, every movement pulling her deeper into the quiet heat that had been building for days. Her breath came in shallow, deliberate rhythms, matching the subtle, unhurried pace of his hands. Every touch, every brush of skin against skin, sent small, powerful waves through her body. Janet felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, aware of every inch, every curve, every point that responded to the deliberate intimacy Dave offered. She realized with quiet astonishment that she had been starved, not for touch, but for attention, for presence, for the slow, measured awakening that allowed desire to flourish without shame. Dave's hand moved with care, mapping her body in a language that required no words. Janet's body responded instinctively, muscles coiling, shivers spreading, chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Her awareness narrowed until nothing existed but the warmth of touch, the deliberate presence, the subtle intimacy of someone who truly noticed her. Time seemed to stretch. Janet felt herself surrendering fully, not to recklessness but to recognition. Every inch of her body was alive, awakened to sensation, to intention, to the quiet eroticism of deliberate attention. She leaned into the subtle pressure of his fingers, felt the heat spreading from her stomach through her chest, along her arms, down her back, her body humming with the awareness that she was fully seen, fully acknowledged, fully wanted. Even when their hands moved away, even when a pause allowed space for breath, Janet's body remained alive. The memory of the heat, the slow, deliberate touch, the careful exploration of every curve and contour lingered like fire beneath her skin. She was no longer imagining desire. She was inhabiting it fully, aware of what she had been missing, awake to the quiet eroticism of being wanted intentionally, passionately, deliberately. By the time the night ended, Janet knew she had crossed another threshold. Her body had been remembered, traced, awakened, and delighted in ways she had almost forgotten existed. Every inch had been acknowledged. Every subtle reaction had been met with deliberate attention. And in the quiet aftermath, she felt a tremor of awareness that settled deep, a heat that refused to fade, and a hunger that demanded continuation. Janet lay awake long after, her body still humming with the memory of touch. The nights with Dave's hands had become a rhythm she could not escape, a pull that grew stronger with each deliberate caress. She was alive, fully aware, and no longer willing to deny what she had discovered. That desire was hers to claim, and that Dave had already shown her the power of being wanted completely. The next morning, Janet woke with the lingering warmth of Dave's touch still echoing beneath her skin. Her body remembered him before her mind fully registered reality. Every subtle ache, every pulse of awareness reminded her that she had crossed lines she had long ignored, that her craving had become impossible to deny. She reached for her phone, and the screen told her everything she had been putting off. 10 missed calls, all from her husband, each one a quiet reminder of her obligations, her reality, and the life she had been living while her body had been elsewhere, awake to desire. Janet's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the sharp, undeniable contrast between the two worlds she inhabited. Her husband's calls represented routine duty, the life she had signed for and now felt unable to inhabit fully. Dave's presence represented sensation, attention, acknowledgement, the awakening of every inch of her awareness. The tension between these realities made her acutely conscious of the heat still coiled low in her body. She imagined what her husband might think. Perhaps he would be frustrated, irritated, or suspicious. But Janet could not summon worry, not yet. Her body remembered Dave, the deliberate, patient attention, the intimacy that left her shivering softly in ways her marriage had never allowed. 10 calls could wait, desire could not. Her mind flicked through the mornings and nights she had spent in quiet anticipation, tracing the warmth of his hands, the gentle pressure, the careful acknowledgement of every inch of her body. Janet felt it again, the slow burn of memory, the subtle quiver that traced from her spine to her shoulders, the pulse of heat that reminded her she had been awakened. Even now, the echo of the past nights lingered, teasing her with what had been and what could come again. Dave's presence was no longer just memory. It was a claim, deliberate and undeniable. Janet had learned to inhabit desire, and her body had not forgotten the lessons of attention, patience, and intimacy. She imagined him again, his hand tracing a deliberate path, lingering just long enough to ignite every nerve. Her fingers tingled at the thought, and a soft warmth pooled low, spreading upward with a quiet insistence. Each of the 10 calls from her husband became a background noise, a reminder of the life she had, but not of the life she wanted in this moment. Janet did not need words. She did not need confrontation. Her body remembered everything she had experienced with Dave, and that memory demanded acknowledgement. Every pulse, every shiver, every subtle quiver that had been stirred over back-to-back nights reminded her of the hunger that could not be ignored. By mid-morning, she had settled into a quiet, tense awareness. Her husband might continue to call. He might notice her distraction, her pulse, her breath. But Janet's body remained alive with memory, humming with heat, awakened and aware. The tension was exquisite, an undercurrent of danger that made her pulse quicken even further. She allowed herself a private smile, a recognition of what she had discovered, of what she now possessed in sensation and desire. Her body had been remembered fully. Every inch had been awakened, every subtle response noted and reciprocated. The 10 missed calls were irrelevant to that knowledge. They could wait. In that moment, Janet understood fully the contrast between presence and attention, between obligation and desire. She had been loyal, she had fulfilled her role, but her body had remembered something she had almost forgotten. Desire, intention, and intimacy could not be scheduled. They could only be claimed, felt, and nurtured. And she had claimed it, fully, deliberately, and consciously. The day stretched ahead, but Janet's body carried the heat of last night, the lingering warmth of deliberate touch, and the awareness that what she had learned could not be undone. 10 missed calls were trivial in the face of every inch remembered, every nerve awakened, every pulse stirred by attention that had been patient, deliberate, and fully present. Her husband could wait, Janet's body would not. The tension had been building quietly, like a storm Janet had felt, but had convinced herself would never arrive. Her husband's presence had always been steady, predictable, unchallenging, until now. Until the awareness of Dave's hands, the deliberate attention, the nights of slow, measured intimacy had awakened a hunger that could not be hidden. Janet had moved carefully, balancing desire with routine, but one evening the equilibrium shattered. She was caught in a moment of closeness with Dave. Not fully reckless, not fully exposed, but close enough that the air between them had thickened with intention and heat. The brush of his hand along hers, the subtle warmth of his body near, and the low, patient pressure along her back had drawn her into the intensity of sensation, and she had responded instinctively. Her husband entered the room without warning. He paused, taking in the subtle tension, the lingering warmth of bodies too aware of one another. Janet felt her pulse spike, a sharp heat that traveled through her chest, her spine, and the low coil of desire that Dave's presence had stoked. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting, no betrayal announced with violence. It was quiet, deliberate, intimate in its own way, the kind of confrontation that made every nerve in her body flare. Her husband's gaze, calm yet piercing, took in the scene. He saw the lingering awareness, the subtle curve of Janet's body leaning slightly toward Dave, the faint flush of heat that refused to hide. Janet's body reacted before her mind could. Every shiver, every pulse of warmth, every subtle muscle tension was a testament to what had happened, to what she had been experiencing in private. She felt exposed, yet alive, acutely aware of herself in a way she never had been in years of marriage. Her husband did not speak immediately. He observed, measured, waited. The quiet confrontation left space for every detail to register, the deliberate intimacy, the slow, lingering touches, the tension that had been growing night after night. Janet's awareness of every inch of herself, every subtle reaction, every quiet ache was laid bare under his gaze. Dave stepped back, giving Janet space without withdrawing his attention. The subtle acknowledgement of his presence, the lingering heat of deliberate touch, remained between them. Janet felt herself quiver softly, caught between the awareness of what she had experienced and the reality of being confronted. Her husband finally spoke, not with anger but with calm, controlled curiosity that demanded an explanation. Janet's mind raced, but words failed to capture the depth of sensation, the awakening of desire, the slow, deliberate intimacy that had changed her. She realized that explanation alone could not convey what her body had remembered, what it craved, and what it had been given. She tried. She explained in measured tones, attempting to justify the attention, the presence, the connection. But her husband's gaze remained steady, unflinching, probing in a way that made her body tense even further. The intimacy she had shared with Dave had been deliberate and patient, and now every inch of awareness, every subtle pulse of desire was on display. He listened, he observed, he measured, and for the first time Janet realized that confrontation was not about punishment, it was about awareness. Her husband had noticed what she had been feeling, what she had been responding to, and the acknowledgement alone made her body tremble in quiet heat. There was no screaming, no accusations, no dramatic betrayal. The confrontation was a silent reckoning between desire and duty, attention and absence, awakening and routine. Janet's body remembered every inch of what Dave had offered, and her mind wrestled with the presence of her husband, the awareness he now held, and the heat that refused to fade. When the moment passed, it did so with quiet inevitability. Janet's pulse still raced, her body still alive with memory and sensation, but she knew something fundamental had shifted. The deliberate intimacy with Dave could no longer be hidden, yet the confrontation had not destroyed her. Instead, it forced recognition, not shame, not guilt, but acknowledgement of desire, attention, and awakening. Janet's body, alive and humming, remained fully aware. Her mind, racing yet centered, understood that this confrontation was not the end, but a step toward a new kind of clarity, a reckoning that would shape the path forward. Every inch of sensation she had experienced, every deliberate touch, every patient caress, was now undeniable, undeniable in the quiet presence of both men who had claimed her attention in different ways. And Janet, trembling softly, fully aware of every inch remembered and awakened, realized she had survived. She had been seen, she had been confronted, and she was still alive, still feeling, still desiring. The morning after the confrontation, Janet felt the weight of clarity settle over her. Her body still hummed with the memory of Dave's deliberate touch, the patient intimacy that had awakened every inch of her, but there was no shame now, only understanding. She had been seen, desired, and confronted, and the experience left her stronger, more aware of herself, and fully alive in ways she had almost forgotten. Her husband approached quietly, the tension from the night before still lingering in the air, but tempered with an unexpected softness. Janet observed him, aware of the subtle shift in his presence. There was no anger in his gaze now, only recognition, understanding, and a measure of acceptance that surprised her. The confrontation had not shattered her life. It had created a space for honesty, awareness, and even intimacy in a different, more honest form. Dave, too, was present, not physically, but in the memory that lingered like warmth beneath her skin. Janet had learned from him what it meant to be truly noticed, to be touched with intention, to inhabit desire fully. That knowledge was hers to keep, to carry forward into every moment, every encounter, every breath. The days that followed were not perfect, but they were real. Janet embraced the awareness she had gained, allowing herself to balance the world she inhabited. With her husband, she found renewed attention, deeper understanding, and subtle intimacy that had been missing before. With Dave, she had discovered the heat of desire, the power of deliberate attention, and the awakening of a body long neglected. Janet's body no longer quivered with fear or guilt. Instead, it responded with confidence, awareness, and the quiet satisfaction of being fully alive. Every subtle touch, every brush of skin, every pulse of memory from past nights reminded her that she had reclaimed herself, her desire, and her ability to feel without shame. She smiled softly to herself one evening, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here, from anticipation to awakening, from tension to confrontation, and finally to understanding. Janet had navigated desire, discovery, and reconciliation with patience, awareness, and courage. And in that quiet moment, Janet Anderson understood fully. Happiness was not about perfection, secrecy, or compliance. It was about inhabiting her own body, honoring her own desires, and allowing herself to be seen, recognized, and desired. Her happy ending was not about punishment or guilt. It was about ownership of her body, her awareness, her desire, and her life. She had crossed thresholds she had once feared, and now she stood fully awakened, fully alive, and fully aware of the power she carried within herself. Janet closed her eyes and felt the warmth lingering beneath her skin, the memory of every deliberate touch, every slow caress, every inch remembered, and she knew this was only the beginning of a life fully lived. For Janet, desire, awareness, and fulfillment were no longer secrets. They were hers. She smiled, finally free to feel, free to be, and free to claim every inch of her awakening.